Hello, thank you for joining today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Colossians. Today we are in chapter 3 and we're going to look at verse 25, the last verse in chapter 3. Again, as always, we want to get the full context of what we're looking at here, so go ahead and go back to verse 18, read verse 18 all the way through chapter 4, verse 1, so we can understand what Paul's trying to tell us here. As we look at today's verse, it says this: For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. So that's the last verse that we read Paul writing to the slaves. And this section, from verse 18 through chapter 4, verse 1, we recognize that Paul is showing us the different relationships that exist within the Christian household. And in this case, we're looking at the final relationship, the slave-master relationship, recognizing that in those days, families would have had, or many families would have had slaves, and so that would have just been the norm back then. And so Paul's speaking to the slave-master relationship, recognizing again that the masters would be the husbands and wives of the family. In these relationships, typically we see a verse for each role, each responsibility, but here for slaves, we've seen several verses for slaves. And we get to the last one today. As we read this last one, we recognize that there is consequences for behavior. It says that he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong that he has done, and without partiality. So when we recognize that, we look at this concept first of partiality. What's he saying? He's saying that God is impartial. God will do this judging without partiality. God is impartial. Why is Paul writing this to the slaves at that time? Well, I believe that it's possible that at that time, as slaves were becoming Christians, that there may have been this idea that, well, since I'm a slave, I'm owed something. I'm in a bad situation. So because of that, God will be gracious to me if I don't do certain things, or if I do certain things I'm not supposed to. After all, I was dealt a bad hand, so I deserve a little bit extra leeway. And with that concept, Paul shoots that down. He says, no, absolutely not. He says God judges without partiality. So in other words, it doesn't matter what is going on in your life. There is the right and there is wrong. And when we do wrong, we will be judged by that. When we do right, we will be judged by that. So our judgment is not based on the situation we're in. There's this concept of situational ethics. God doesn't work on situations. God works on right and wrong. And so today we see that there's these situations where we will look at somebody and judge how harshly they should be judged, or whether they're even right or wrong based on their situation. There may be people who are doing the wrong things, but their cause is right. And so we say, well, it's okay that they did the wrong thing. Their cause is right. Or there may be people who have done the wrong thing, but because somewhere down the line, that wrong thing was done to them. So, for instance, we might say, oh, yeah, he abused children. That wasn't right, but he was abused as a child. So we'll give him leeway. Well, God doesn't work that way. God doesn't say, well, because something's happened to you, or you're in a certain situation, or you believe something, that if you do the wrong thing, it'll be okay. We'll let that slide. That's not how God works. God judges impartially. Things are very white and black with him. There's no gray with him. And he knows what is right, he knows what is wrong, and he knows what's in our hearts. And he judges that way. And so what's he judging? Well, things that we do wrong. And what is that? Well, we kind of have to go back to the verse previous to see what that is. If you remember at the end of verse 24, it says, serve the Lord Jesus, right? And when we recognize that a command is being given us to serve Jesus. And that is regardless of what's going on. When we do what Christ has called us to do, then we are doing right. When we don't do what Christ has called us to do, then we are doing wrong. If we do what Christ has told us not to do, then we have done wrong. And so we can see that what Paul's saying is to the slaves and to us as Christians who may be in the world as employees or workers or just any Christian really, what he's saying is that we're to serve Christ in all that we do. In everything we do, we're to serve Christ. And when we choose not to serve Christ, that we have done the wrong thing. And that will bring judgment upon us in a negative way. And we're not going to be able to stand on our situation or on our, or something else that we can say, yeah, but it's right or wrong, and God judges impartially. So that takes care of verse 25 and actually chapter 3. The next time we'll get back into the rest of the relationship with the master-slave as we look at the master. So join me next time as we do that. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments on anything that we discussed today, go ahead and put them in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day, and God bless you.